And I received an email from my cousin's husband in Alberta on Tuesday that just, wow, we have no idea that those same divisions and differences, though we're much nicer about them because we're polite Canadians, exist within our own country. So that's actually all I'll say about the election. You guys can take a huge sigh of relief now. And because I think that this skill set that we're talking about, this ability to navigate our differences, this ability to deepen our curiosity about one another for the purpose of facilitating deeper friendships with one another, and also empowering one another to be unique even in the face of differences, rather than we're all just kind of go to the same common denominator so that we don't fight. And then at that point, that argument for being alive, well, we're only most fully alive when we're only most fully ourselves. And I think the tendency has been then that we only show up in the room with people who are like us. Apparently that's why nobody knew Trump was going to win the last election, because we don't actually ever talk to people who disagree with us. So then we don't really know what half the world is thinking. So let me just bring this banner down then. I think that what we do in Reaching for Rainbows, in actual fact, is that we give these girls the skills, ultimately, to be able to do this, recognizing that the skills to develop good relationships, to be empowered and have that sense of belonging, is in fact what is going to change their lives. And I'll say more about that later. But in terms of what this tradition has to say about this invitation, the answer is kind of always the same. Jesus' answer is always the same. And you're going to go, oh yeah, we know what the answer is, right? Always the same. Something happens around the table when we're sitting with one another over carrots, all right, that provides the context for us to be curious, for us not to be quite so cautious and nervous, and for us to sit in that place and be in that space of being not just the same, but different together. And if we can't be different together, then what do we have to offer the world except for another club? We'll be our club over here, and this is what page we're on, and you guys can be your club over there, and you can be on that page. And very often, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the church has been seen as that. So, passage from today, it's going to be very familiar to some of you, and it's been written about a zillion times, and we could look at it a zillion different ways, but I think it may help us provide a doorway to the conversation that I think we all need to have, and a conversation that I think is manifested in the Reaching for Rainbows program. Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted by her many kitchen duties. So she came to him and asked, Jesus, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. But Jesus answered her, Martha, wow, you are worried and distracted by so many things. There is something much more important going on here. And Mary is attending to it. Because Mary's gotten herself to the table, part of the community, listening, attending, engaging. So some would argue that it's only supper. But I think that what happens around the table can respond to our deepest challenges, both in ourselves, our families, our communities, our world. And I have two stories to share with you this morning. So I caught this one podcast a week ago, Monday. I was in my car listening to this, and my mouth was hanging open. So the story, or the interview, was with two men. Let me just get their names here. Derek Black and Matthew Stevenson, who were both attending New College in Florida. Matthew Stevenson is the son of a very, very prominent white supremacist in the States, who in fact was responsible for creating the first white supremacist website that got accused of being like hate something. Sorry, what's it called? Yeah, hate speech, right. But the first time that a page went online, right? And his son Matthew was considered the heir apparent to leadership of this big group. And we're not talking about a group that's coming out of the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is white, upwardly mobile, educated middle class, all right? And so some people on campus are aware of his identity as not just the son of, but the next crown prince of this organization. And lo and behold, who was living in a dorm room upstairs but a guy whose name was Derek Black? Oh, an Orthodox Jew, all right? Right upstairs, who hosted Shabbat every Friday night in his home, right? Which is our version of sacred practice, except it's around a meal Friday night. And what does Derek do? Derek knows who Matthew is, but Derek invites him to dinner. And then Derek lays the ground rules for everybody else at the supper, and that is, they can't take him on. No, we're inviting this person to dinner. This person is our guest, and we will practice radical hospitality, radical inclusion, embrace, etc. Which meant, of course, that then some people refused to go to dinner on Friday night because they weren't going to have dinner with that guy. All right. So for 2 years, Matthew joined the Sabbath dinner Friday night on the dorm room upstairs, while at the same time, and this is a little aside, but part of the white supremacist movement is, I mean, it's a little bit, I have to choose my words well here, but providing all the statistics that prove why non-white people, especially Jewish people, are trying to take over the world and dominate us, all right? And these are people who are well-educated. So they've done their research and they've got their stats correct. And suddenly Matthew, with all of these stats, is talking about spending 2 years going, And at one occasion, he was feeling a little uneasy about his own position, and one of his roles was to organize small conferences for the youth of this movement, just so that they could all get educated and they could learn the stats, and then they would have it exactly right why they were supposed to hate people who weren't like them. And on one occasion, and this was the interview. This interview was 10 years after that, by the way, and they're both at the Holocaust National Monument in Washington together, telling their story. And he said, I was beginning to feel a little uneasy and felt the need to dig in a little further into my perspective, so I thought it was time for me to organize a conference for the youth, just to remind us all why we are supposed to and allowed to actually hate all these people. And so he wasn't going to be able to make it to Sabbath meal. And Derek said, oh, you're not going to make it to Sabbath meal? No. Oh, where are you going to go? He goes, I said family reunion. He goes, because in actual fact, it was true. My entire family was going to be there. So here we are 10 years later, and listening to how being invited to that meal every Friday, without being confronted, without being excluded, was part of what transformed this man so that he has removed himself from his family's vocation. Is that not remarkable? Just an invitation to dinner. So the second one, it's an interview with two women whose names are Jennifer and Lennon. One is a black Methodist minister, and the other one is just very engaged in civil conversations and social change. And they founded what is called this is why I need to screen back there, the People's Supper. They found the People's Supper, what was the year that Trump was elected? 16, all right. They founded the People's Supper in January 2017. Why? Because like everybody else who really thought that the country was becoming a little bit more inclusive, welcoming, friendly, hospitable, and suddenly, and all those nice liberals were just going, what the heck? Like, Well, okay, but if you're not going to talk to somebody who doesn't think like you, then you're never really going to find out what's going on in your country, are you? And, like us, by the way. So they initiated these suppers where they brought together people of different faiths, races, perspectives, etc., for the pure purpose of sitting in that place and being curious about those people who thought completely differently than they did. 1,500 meals later. Isn't that amazing? And they quoted last night, or in the interview, they quoted Martin Luther King. We cannot learn to appreciate our neighbor until we become friends with our neighbor. And we cannot in any way think that social change is possible unless we do it as a circle of friends and community. Like if we think that there's going to be this little minority over here going, we got this, we've got this vision, and it's very, very interesting. So then the table then has become the antidote, the response to this incredibly fractured culture. So we take the table pretty seriously around here as a circle of friends. For example, this was 20 at my home last Sunday. The one thing about the table that we haven't mentioned is that it just doesn't matter. If it's potluck and everybody brings something to the table, it's like the sorcerer's apprentice, right? There's just way more than you're ever going to have. So whenever we gather at the table, whenever we do this thing around the table, suddenly in a place where we might have thought there was scarcity or not enough, there is suddenly, it's overflowing. Like I made the best turkey soup over what was left over on that table. This is a fun picture. Like, this is a kid who grew up in a Mennonite town of Steinbach, Manitoba, right? That's Jim, right? With Inte, who's just the most delicious 19-year-old from Chile I've ever met. So Inte was staying with Michael and Marisa and here to learn whatever. But there you are. That's what happens when you get invited to dinner. There's something about a diversity that rises. I love this picture. Pam on the right was invited at the last minute because Bernice heard that she didn't have any plans, and she lives alone, and she'd had a big working day, and wow, always room for one more. And this is my favorite, wait for it, like the immigrants, right? From Australia on the left, Britain on the right. And I would suggest that it is this vision that we hold at St. Andrew's that is, I think, the gold within the Judeo-Christian tradition, is that Jesus insisted that the table be set for everyone. And it was out of this vision that we then gave birth to Reaching for Rainbows, recognizing that there were children and families in this community that in fact were not being included at the table of abundance. And so the Reaching for Rainbows vision was meant to bring girls and families, sometimes on the margins of the culture, into community to experience the abundance that we all experience in community. So here's one of our Christmas dinners. When we had Valerie Michelson visit the Reaching for Rainbows community a few months ago, she has done all the research on what it takes to change the trajectory of girls or anyone who is vulnerable. And I want you to listen to this because in many ways I would suggest that Jesus was very familiar with those same levers, all right? That it's not complicated, but you need to be intentional of how you bring people into community for the purpose of helping them navigate a new story. So there are 3 levers, and they are these. Creating an environment where people can develop relationships. It's about providing people, and in Reaching for Rainbows, girls in particular, an opportunity to explore their own giftedness so that they are empowered to shine their unique light Because we will all be healthier when their unique, healthy light is shining. And finally, giving them a sense of belonging. Who knew it was that basic? Relationships, empowerment, and belonging.